Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating challenge, unraveling a political system that operates with more pomp, pageantry, and unwritten rules than a centuries-old secret society. We are talking about the intricate, sometimes totally baffling, but always compelling mechanics of the British political system. If you've ever watched a chaotic debate in the House of Commons, or maybe seen a royal procession and wondered how it all actually connects to running a modern country, you are absolutely in the right place.
So here's a thought for you. How do you run a highly stable, modern democracy without an actual rule book? Well, not a written one anyway. Let's confront the central, fascinating paradox of the UK government. Think about almost every other modern democracy out there. They usually have a single, sacred document, a constitution, that lays out exactly how the government works. The UK doesn't have one, at least not in the way you might expect. So how on earth does a country maintain centuries of stable democracy without a centralized written rule book to point to?
Part 1. The Rules. An Unwritten Constitution.
Now, you won't find a single fragile document sitting under glass in a London museum. But make no mistake, there are absolutely rules to this game. The fancy political science term for this is uncodified. Basically, it means the Constitution is very real, but it's scattered, it's fluid, it's more of a living framework built on a mixture of laws, history, and honestly, just deeply ingrained habits. So, what are we actually looking at here? It really comes down to 5 main pillars. First up, statutes. These are your standard formal laws passed by Parliament. Then you've got common law, which is centuries of legal precedent set by judges. Third, and this is a big one, conventions. These are unwritten traditions where everyone just kind of goes, yeah, we'll do it this way because we've literally always done it this way. Then add in judicial decisions made by courts interpreting the law. And finally, authoritative works. This one is truly wild. We're talking about historic textbooks written by constitutional experts who are long dead, but their words carry the actual weight of constitutional law. Tie all these pieces together, and you get this invisible, yet incredibly resilient constitutional web.
Moving on to Part 2. The Board. 800 Years of Evolution.
You know, you definitely don't build a complex system like that overnight. There wasn't some grand convention where everyone sat down in a room and drafted a master plan. The whole thing actually kicks off way back in 1215 with the Magna Carta, famously the very first time rebellious barons put a legal check on a monarch's absolute power. Then, fast forward through a ton of historical turmoil to the Bill of Rights in 1689, which firmly established Parliament's legal rights over the crown. And then we hit the critical Parliament Acts of 1911 and 1949, perfectly cementing the democratic power of elected officials. Each of these milestones was a tectonic shift in the political landscape, forged through major conflict and compromise.
So why does this massive timeline matter to us today? Because this 800-year evolution tells one specific, undeniable story: the steady transfer of supreme authority away from the monarchs and right into the hands of the elected officials in the House of Commons. It's basically a slow-motion power shift from the crown to the people, fundamentally reshaping how the entire nation is governed.
Which brings us to Section 3, the arena, the sovereign parliament.
Welcome to the absolute beating heart of UK political power, the two-chamber parliament. This is where the magic and, well, the governing actually happens. But before we look at who's inside, we really need to nail down a dense but absolutely vital concept: parliamentary sovereignty. Because the UK has no single written constitution, Parliament acts as the supreme legal authority in the land, meaning no court can strike down an act of Parliament. No monarch can veto it. If Parliament legislates it, it is law, period. No exceptions.
And there's this really fascinating contrast between its two houses. On one side, we have the House of Commons. They're fully elected, they wield the real legislative muscle, control the nation's finances, and can literally remove the government. Then, on the other side, the House of Lords. Completely unelected, they act more as a revising chamber, scrutinizing legislation, and offering some pretty incredible specialist expertise. We're talking everyone from former cabinet ministers to leading scientists. It's this brilliant balancing act between a raw democratic mandate and seasoned expert oversight.
But the real engine of this democracy? That sits with just 650 individuals. These are the elected members of Parliament, or MPs, in the House of Commons. Every single one represents a specific local area, making them the ultimate voice of the public. And here's a funny, kind of quirky detail. Their legendary debating chamber, it is actually too small to physically seat all 650 MPs at once. That physical squeeze is a huge part of why their debates are so famously chaotic, energetic, and incredibly loud.
So,
What are these 650 folks actually doing? Well, their powers are massive. They make the laws, they approve literally every single penny of taxation, and they fiercely scrutinize the executive branch. But their absolute trump card: they can entirely remove the government through a vote of no confidence. The sheer drama of this is incredible. If a government loses the support of a majority of these MPs, it can trigger a sudden general election and flip the entire country's leadership overnight. It guarantees the government is always, immediately accountable to the legislature.
Let's look at Section 4. The players. The monarch.
Okay, so we've got the legislature down, but what about the executive branch? The UK operates on a really interesting dual executive system, and we need to look at the players involved. Let's start with the most famous, but surprisingly least politically powerful half, the monarch. As the constitutional head of state, their role is basically to represent the entire nation. They provide this deep, unifying sense of historical continuity, staying completely apart from the daily mudslinging of partisan politics. Now, if you just look at it on paper, the monarch's powers are pretty intimidating. They officially appoint the prime minister. They have the power to summon or prorogue, which just means suspend parliament. Every single bill passed by parliament has to get royal assent from them to actually become law. Plus, of course, they handle countless ceremonial and diplomatic duties all over the globe.
But, and this is a massive but, here's the crucial catch. Remember those unwritten conventions we talked about earlier? Well, this is the granddaddy of them all. Tradition strictly dictates that these massive powers are exercised almost entirely on ministerial advice. The monarch doesn't just wake up and act on their own political opinions or personal whims. They act on the advice of their elected ministers. So while the theoretical power is absolute, the practical, day-to-day power is highly restricted and mostly ceremonial.
Moving on to Section 5, the players, prime minister and cabinet.
This brings us to the folks who actually pull the levers of power, the second half of that dual executive, and the true political muscle of the British system, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. While the monarch is the head of state, the Prime Minister is the head of government. They get this immensely powerful gig by leading the political party that commands a majority in the House of Commons. They're the ones selecting ministers, coordinating national policy, and, actually running the country.
And within this executive branch, there's a very strict hierarchy. You'll often hear government and cabinet tossed around like they mean the exact same thing, but they don't. The Council of Ministers includes every single minister, dozens of them, managing all the various departments. But sitting right at the very peak of that pyramid is the cabinet. This is the PM and a much smaller elite squad of senior ministers who actually make the big, principal policy decisions for the nation.
We are talking about a seriously tight inner circle here, just 20 to 25 people. This core group meets regularly around that famous table at 10 Downing Street to make the absolute heaviest decisions on things like national defense, the economy, foreign affairs, the whole shebang. Honestly, the pressure this small group operates under is staggering, as they actively decide the fate of millions of citizens from inside one single room.
And here's where it gets ruthless. They are bound together by an unwritten rule called collective responsibility. This convention demands that once a decision is made behind those closed cabinet doors, every single minister absolutely must support it in public and in Parliament. The reality of this is brutal. A minister might actually hate a proposed policy, fighting bitterly against it in private, but once the cabinet officially agrees, they have to smile for the cameras and publicly champion it. If they can't bring themselves to do that, they must resign immediately. If they speak out, their career in the cabinet is over. It's a strict rule, but it forces the government to present an unbreakable, unified front.
Finally, Section 6, the engine, core principles. So, stepping back and looking at this entire engine, we can really see the essential DNA of the British system. It's a constitutional monarchy where the crown reigns but does not rule. It uses a dual executive to brilliantly separate timeless state ceremony from bitter partisan politics. It relies on a powerful cabinet that is directly, entirely responsible to a sovereign parliament. And it's all tied together by the rule of law and strict ministerial responsibility. Honestly, it's a masterpiece of political evolution.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought. We usually just assume that a government absolutely needs a rigid, codified constitution to be safe and stable, right? But if an 800-year-old, entirely unwritten, highly flexible system can adapt to everything from medieval civil wars to global empires, all the way to our modern digital age, are highly rigid written constitutions actually a disadvantage? It's definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning how the world works.